Have you ever looked at a map and imagined a city that wasn't there? Not just on maps, but secret cities whose very existence was unknown in the real world. Today, we take you to one of the darkest secrets of the Cold War. The invisible cities of the Soviet Union, erased from maps and known only by code names. This is a place where science and paranoia intertwine, where tens of thousands of people gave up their lives to live a state secret. It all began at the end of World War II, with the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union was horrified by America's nuclear superiority. Stalin had to build his own atomic bomb at any cost. Lavrent Beria, the ruthless chief of the Soviet secret police, was put in charge of this massive and secret mission. Beria's plan was simple but daring: to build massive scientific and industrial complexes in the most remote corners of the country, completely isolated from the outside world, dedicated solely to the production of nuclear weapons and technology. This was the birth of the system of invisible cities. The secrecy of the project was so vital that the very existence of these cities was considered a top state secret. Tens of thousands of Gulag prisoners, political prisoners, and criminals were used for their construction. These people built massive facilities, laboratories, housing, and roads deep in the forests and at the foot of mountains. And many of them disappeared in these lands, along with the secret of these hidden cities. When construction was finished, the country's brightest scientists, engineers, and technicians took their place. A new life was beginning for them, a life that was both a reward and a punishment. For those who settled in these cities, life was a kind of golden cage. While famine and poverty reigned in the rest of the Soviet Union, those living in these closed cities were in a virtual paradise. Salaries were many times higher than the average in the rest of the country. Store shelves were filled with all kinds of food, from caviar and quality cheeses to fresh fruit and the best chocolates, which were hard to find even in Moscow. There were the best schools, sports facilities, music, and art academies for children. In short, the state offered them and their families an excellent standard of living. But this luxury came at a heavy price: total isolation. Entry and exit to these cities were controlled by the strictest military rules. The cities were surrounded by kilometers of barbed wire and guarded on all sides by armed soldiers. It was impossible for a resident to step outside the city without special permission. Visiting relatives, going on vacation, or even attending a funeral in another city was subject to years of security investigations and special permits. For an outsider, such as a relative, to come to this city was almost a dream. This isolation gradually eroded family ties. People did not see their parents or siblings for years. Even letters were censored, and phone calls could be monitored at any moment. People could not tell even their closest relatives where they lived or what they did for a living. They would only use coded expressions like "I work in a mailbox near Moscow." This situation completely cut them off from the outside world and imprisoned their lives only in that small, closed universe they were in. They were strangers and exiles in their own country. Their homeland was now that small city behind the barbed wire. The most famous of these mysterious cities was undoubtedly Sarov. There was no such place on the maps. Its official name was Arzama 16. This was the birthplace of the Soviet atomic bomb. It was a center where brilliant physicists like Igor Kurchatov and great scientists like Andrei who would later become a regime dissident, worked, and the brightest minds of the country gathered. Arzama 16 was not just a research center, but a full-fledged city with schools, hospitals, and theaters where tens of thousands of people lived. But for the residents of this city, the world ended where the barbed wire began. Another important center was Ozersk, at the foot of the Ural Mountains. Its code name was Secrecy 5. It was home to the massive Miak plant, where the plutonium needed for nuclear weapons was produced. However, Ozersk was not just a success story, but also the site of one of the greatest disasters of the nuclear age. In 1957, a massive explosion occurred in a nuclear waste tank at the Miak plant. This event, known to history as the Kishtim disaster, caused more radioactive material to be released into the atmosphere than even Chernobyl. An area of thousands of square kilometers was contaminated with radioactive fallout. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated, and countless people lost their lives to radiation-related diseases. But the Soviet regime managed to hide this massive disaster from the world, and even its own citizens, for 30 years. The people of Ozersk lived for years, unaware of this apocalypse happening right next to them. Not all closed cities were built for the nuclear program. For example, Severomorsk, located on the Kola Peninsula, was the main base of the Soviet Northern Fleet. It was home to nuclear submarines and strategic bombers. The city was like a dagger pointed at the West throughout the Cold War, and its residents lived their lives with the awareness that they were on the front lines of a war that could start at any moment. Each of these cities, although appearing like a normal Soviet city from the outside, held the greatest and most dangerous secrets of human history behind its walls. In such an environment, how does being born and raised behind barbed wire affect a person? For children born in these closed cities, the outside world was like a fairy tale. For them, what was normal was this isolated life, where soldiers stood guard at every corner and entry and exit to the city were made with special permissions. While they were taught patriotism and how great the state was at school, they were told that the outside world was a dangerous place, full of enemies. These children grew up without ever seeing a train station or an airport in their lives. Even the idea of a relative coming from another city was very foreign to them. This situation created a deep psychological effect. On the one hand, a sense of absolute trust and dependence on the state developed because every need was met by the state. The state was both mother and father to them, the only entity that protected, fed, and educated them. On the other hand, they harbored a deep fear and distrust of the outside world. The outside was full of the unknown, danger, and strangers who were not like them. These people were socially trapped in their own small communities. Everyone knew each other. Everyone shared the same secret. While this created a strong sense of community, it also blunted individuality and critical thinking. They were parts of an invisible society, giving up their own identities to protect the state's secret. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 had an earthquake effect on these closed cities. The state they had served for years, to which they had dedicated their lives, was suddenly gone. The barbed wire was removed, the secrets were revealed, and the existence of these cities was officially recognized. However, this freedom brought with it a massive identity crisis. People who had lived in fear of the outside world for years suddenly found themselves in that world. The economic system had collapsed, and the privileges and high salaries they were used to had disappeared. Many began to miss the safe and orderly life of the closed cities. The outside world, on the other hand, approached them with suspicion. They were seen as the privileged children of the old regime, caged birds. They struggled to find a place for themselves in the newly established Russia. The scientific and technological accumulation in these cities was suddenly left ownerless. Many scientists emigrated to the West for better conditions. This situation created a wave of brain drain, and the former glory days of these centers were left behind. So, what is the legacy of these cities today? Surprisingly, many still maintain their closed city status. Nuclear centers like Sarov and Ozersk are still vital for Russia's strategic defense programs, and entry and exit are strictly controlled as before. However, people living in these cities now have the freedom to travel and communicate with the outside world. Still, that isolated spirit of the Cold War can still be felt in the streets of these cities. Invisible cities have taken their place in history as an incredible monument to a regime's survival, paranoia, the power of science, and the resilience of the human spirit. They are the last remnants of a forgotten world, not on maps, but costing the lives of tens of thousands of people. Thank you for exploring this extraordinary story with us. If you are interested in such mysterious and historical topics, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.